This is Government Chapter 2, History of American Government, discussion number 3, the Articles of Confederation. When the states formed the Articles of Confederation government and the constitutional government later, they were starting completely from scratch, right? Well, not really. One thing we want to make sure we notice is that they did take examples from history. A lot of the men that showed up for the Second Continental Congress and for the Constitutional Convention spent time reading about the ancient governments of democracy of Athens and of Rome. They also took a look at their English government that they had come from, and they saw the parts that worked and they saw the parts that didn't work. But on top of that, every single colony, there's 13 of them, all had some type of democratic government. And as each of these 13 colonies functioned, both first as a colony and then as an independent government once they had declared their independence from Great Britain, they all had different ways of doing things, different idiosyncrasies, and so the people that showed up at these conventions and for the Articles of Confederation all had wonderful examples of what they thought was the best way, and they could pick and choose from all these different types of government. So what did the state governments provide to the national formation of a government? Well, here's some ideas that we see. First of all, the idea of popular sovereignty, where the government exists with the consent of the governed. Remember that social contract idea that we talked about in Chapter 1. Also, the idea of limited government. Remember the Magna Carta limited the powers of the king. There's only certain things that the king was allowed to do and certain things the king was not allowed to do. The idea of limited government applied to an entire government instead of one particular part was an important thing that they saw in the state governments that they wanted to include in the national government. Certain rights are guaranteed. Also, the separation of powers and checks and balances were very important to the people who formed both the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. So the Articles of Confederation came about through the Second Continental Congress, was ratified by all the states in 1781. It established a firm league of friendship. Each state kept its sovereignty, freedom, independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right not expressly delegated to the United States. So in other words, we have 13 independent countries who can do anything that they want within their own borders, except in the specific places where they are promising to work together. When they work together, each state only gets one vote. Doesn't matter if you were New York or Virginia being the largest states, or Rhode Island, which was the smallest one, everyone still got the same effect in the National Confederation, where the several independent groups for a common purpose to work together. That's what the Confederation was supposed to do. Congress was given very specific powers. If you want to look it up in your textbook, I believe they're listed on page 36. And states were obligated to certain expectations. Now, expectations is a very important word because notice they're not requirements. Whenever the National Articles of Confederation Congress needed money, they'd say, okay, everyone, we need money. You need to pay this amount. And then it was up to the state to say, yeah, we'll give the money, or, we don't think you need that much money. Or what a lot of states said was, we have money for our own needs, and we don't have enough to start giving it away to the National Congress. And this was a big problem for the National Congress to continue to exist and pay their bills when the people that were supposed to pay them didn't really bother with the money. So while the Articles of Confederation, we have to say, it got us through the Revolutionary War, the efforts of the Second Continental Congress working within the Articles of Confederation successfully defeated Great Britain. And while the Articles of Confederation was not ratified until 1781, it was kind of a written way that the Second Continental Congress had been working up until that point. But we had 13 separate countries. Trying to get them to all cooperate was not very effective. Congress had no legal authority, or what we also call jurisdiction, to enforce its few powers. They just kind of hoped that the states would behave honorably, and the states often did not behave honorably. They did whatever was best for them, and sometimes it went against what the Articles of Confederation were all about. When we see a conflict between the states, the one that we want to make sure that we pay attention to is one that happens between Maryland and Virginia, and dealing specifically with the Potomac River. Now, we also have to make sure that we know that there is one extremely important American who lives along the Potomac. That would be George Washington. And because of that, of his location on the Potomac, this is going to become the important meeting that leads to the Constitutional Convention. The Potomac River goes between these two former colonies, now states. Now, where exactly does the line go? Is the line all the way on the Virginia coast of the Potomac, or is it so that Maryland has complete control of the Potomac River, or does the line go all the way on the Maryland coast, and so Virginia has complete control, or is there a line that goes right down the middle? There was the dispute of who had control over the Potomac River, and this was since it was a conflict between states. It should be left to the Articles of Confederation Congress, but the Articles of Confederation Congress couldn't come up with a solution. So people were saying that this is a hole in the Articles of Confederation and it needs to be fixed. And so several people started calling for a meeting to fix the Articles of Confederation. And a lot of these calls came from people such as George Washington and James Madison. Now, James Madison is important because he had a different idea. His idea was that the Articles of Confederation and their basic structure were not going to be able to function much longer, and that the gentlemen's agreement of the Articles of Confederation were no longer going to be adhered to by the states, and essentially the 13 separate countries were going to become piecemeal to the point that any European power could come in and take care of them one at a time. And so a brand new document was necessary, and Madison started planning his new document, which after lots of discussion going on in 87 and 88, we have a brand new government formed underneath the United States Constitution, which will be the next discussion. This is the end of Chapter 2, History of American Government, discussion number 3, the Articles of Confederation.